Hi, and thanks for watching the CJC 1295 and Ipamorelin webinar. We appreciate you all tuning in as we start to work with Body Logic and are happy to have you. Just to give you a little bit of background, the people that will be doing the presentation today are myself, Ryan Smith, and Blake as well. Blake is one of our pharmacists, and we'll be covering some of the portions of this. Together, we will hopefully be all of Body Logic MD's point of contact to help with any clinical questions. I think we're going to continue to expand our product list, and we definitely have some different considerations in how we do peptides. Just to give you a little bit of background about TaylorMade generally, we've been doing peptides for over a decade in Australia and have a lot of experience with the CJC and Ipamorelin in particular. Beyond that, we're doing some pretty new and innovative things with current peptides. We're the first ones to do the BPC 157 in the United States, which is another product we're rolling out for you. If you all ever have any questions, you can always reach out to us on our website at taylormadecompounding.com or reach out to Blake and I directly, and we'll definitely provide our email addresses to you in the email format. So again, we thanks and appreciate you all listening, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I won't bore you on the need for growth hormone, as I'm sure that you all are already well acquainted with it and its decline as you age. What I do want to go over is some of the reasons that we prefer some of these secretagogues to traditional growth hormone therapy before we go into some of the benefits over the traditional therapies like Ipamorelin and GHRP2. The first one is obviously cost. Obviously compared to growth hormone, these are a lot less expensive. They're also a lot less restrictive on the FDA prescribing guidelines. Again, with growth hormone being one of the only products you're not allowed to prescribe off-label, you don't run into any of that from a state board or a medical board with some of these growth hormone secretagogues. Additionally, you don't stop producing your own growth hormone and cause any downregulation of your natural production, which is obviously good. As you age, this becomes a therapy that can sort of grow and age with you instead of shutting down your natural production. As we'll talk about a little bit later as well, its cancer risk is sort of debatable in the growth hormone world, but there's definitely some positives to the secretagogues there. And then lastly, its abuse and side effects are much lower with growth hormone. We've included some here that are specific to the secretagogues, but as you all probably know from growth hormone, the things like the carpal tunnel from the increased swelling and water retention, the acromegaly signs and the insulin resistance are all pretty big problems, which you don't find with the secretagogues. So now I'll definitely kick it out to Blake, who will sort of go over the Ipamorelin versus what our recommendation of the CJC and Ipamorelin.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So my name is Blake. I'm one of the pharmacists. Thanks for having me. So this slide is really what we want to kind of focus on and get our point across, because I know, as you all are aware, with this Ipamorelin that you all have been prescribing, simply put, Ipamorelin is just simply out of date. At its time when it came out, it was a great product, produced great results, but again, it's just out of date, and we have a better product that's seen showing better effects, and that's our CJC 1295. The biggest reasoning behind its great effects is the binding time. So with the Ipamorelin, you only get the 8 to 12 minutes on the binding receptor on the pituitary for the release of the growth hormone, and the CJC you get greater than 30 minutes. So you really get that bigger pulse in the growth hormone, that's what we're looking for. So here it just shows the receptors that these products hit on. With the CJC and the Ipamorelin, it's the growth hormone releasing hormone receptor, and then the Ipamorelin and the GHRPs, the 2 and the 6 that you all are familiar with, is going to hit on that growth hormone secretagogue receptor, or that ghrelin receptor, and that's what stimulates to increase the growth hormone release from the pituitary. This slide we won't bore you with. We know you're well aware of it. It just shows basically the release of the IGF-1 from the liver after the growth hormone. So the Ipamorelin, like I mentioned earlier, is the growth hormone secretagogue that we really recommend. With the GHRPs that you all are familiar with, the GHRP2, GHRP6, you really get those some unwanted side effects with a lot of patients with the increased hunger. Sometimes you get increased release of cortisol, prolactin, ACTH. With the Ipamorelin, you really don't get those unwanted side effects with those patients. It's more of a selective growth hormone secretagogue. So, you don't get that ACTH rise and cortisol rise that, we want to try to avoid. Again, this just shows how the GHRP6, causes that extreme hunger, and really is mainly reserved, and we really don't recommend it unless with patients that are, in that cachectic state and really need to boost that hunger. This slide, the main point I want to focus on is the fact that with increased blood glucose and hence increase in insulin in the body, that has an inhibition effect on the growth hormone release. So that is why we really urge the importance of the growth hormone products on an empty stomach to avoid the interference with that insulin and inhibiting that growth hormone secretion.
In this slide, we also want to go over the ghrelin analog effects that are outside of the pituitary. And the reason is this will definitely inform our dosing discussion. And we've been talking a little bit over email on the physician chain about the dosing and taking into account the extra pituitary effects in addition to the pituitary saturation dose. So these are all the different tissues that have that growth hormone secretagogue receptor, particularly the one of interest is the growth hormone secretagogue 1A receptor. So all of these different tissues express that receptor in addition to the pituitary. I also want to talk about our dosing concerns as to why we do this together. Obviously, this isn't new for you all, as you all been dosing the GHRP2 and the GHRP6 together with the Ipamorelin for quite a while. But the reason we do this is because together they're much more synergistic. If you look at this graph from a study by Anderson, you can essentially see that the bottom lines are the GHRPs alone, that middle line is the GHRH alone, and then together you see that big peak, which is essentially 5 to 10 times of the area under the curve for growth hormone secretion. So what that means is by using a combination, you see results quicker, and you see better results in terms of body comp, sleep, skin effects, energy, you name it, all the benefits that you see with growth hormone, you can see in a shorter amount of time with a therapy and a dosing protocol that combines the two. And again, this is just some of those benefits we talked about earlier. Another point I want to make before I go into a deep dive with the dosing is that in particular, there's been a study on the CJC 1295, which shows that you actually increase the messenger RNA in the pituitary, which means that even if you stop this product, you actually help your secretion as you age. So that means that by doing that, you actually start off better whenever you stop than whenever you initially started the therapy. And so this is the beginning of our dosing, which can be rather complicated for the options we've supplied for BodyLogic MD. And the reason we've done that is for two reasons. They're predicated on two ideas. One is that the pituitary saturation dose of a product is going to be 100 micrograms. Particularly the product we're talking about is that GHRP receptor or the Ipamorelin receptor. No one denies that receptors, on the pituitary maxes out at 100 micrograms. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are other tissues which express that receptor. So because other tissues express that receptor, this has been our traditional dosing strategy of 0.1, which would be 200 micrograms of the CJC and 200 micrograms of the Ipamorelin, 5 out of 7 days a week. And so by doing that, you're taking it at night on an empty stomach. You're taking it at night to mimic the natural growth hormone peak. As Blake said earlier, you're taking it on an empty stomach because you don't want any insulin in the system. And together, we think that that's the most natural way to give your pituitary a boost to help release that growth hormone that you typically don't when you age. And we suggest a 5 out of 7 days because we don't want to cause any pituitary downregulation of those receptors, which is the second caveat that we want to talk about in dosing with this. And that is that the ghrelin receptor, that growth hormone secretagogue receptor 1A, is notoriously prone to downregulation. So too much stimulation of that with too high of a dose, or constant stimulation in terms of too frequent of dosing can cause that receptor to essentially go away and the therapy becomes a lot less effective. So one of the other things that you can do with this traditional dosing is to dose it twice a day. And by doing that, you're obviously going to increase the cost, but you can also increase the efficacy and the time to results. So if you want to be particularly aggressive with a patient, you can do it twice a day. And again, as long as you're doing this pulsatile secretion of pituitary stimulation for around 30 minutes, you shouldn't see any issue. So the dosing protocol 2 is taking into account the fact that growth hormone releasing hormone where the CJC is hitting is much more resilient than you would find with that growth hormone secretagogue receptor 1A that you would hit with the Ipamorelin. So here we just changed the ratio to give you a higher ability to target the GHRH receptor with the CJC. So we dose the CJC at 200 micrograms to a 100 micrograms Ipamorelin. That way, if you are worried about downregulating that Ipamorelin receptor, you can sort of dose the CJC at a higher rate to get a better result. And again, this can be done two times a day as well, which again is going to yield a 4 ml vial instead of the typical 2 ml, which we provide for a monthly supply. And then lastly is the lowest dose. This is again is what a lot of people from Vitalogic MD have been prescribing based on Dr. Seed's recommendation. And that is again that 100 micrograms of the CJC and 100 micrograms of the Ipamorelin, based on those two ideas that the pituitary saturation dose is 100 micrograms and that you don't want to overstimulate it or risk overstimulating it because of the negative downregulation. And again, this can be done twice a day as well, which Dr. Seed will even sometimes say up to 3 times a day. So you might hear that spoken about another time. If you all have any questions on that, please let me know. But essentially, protocol 1, 2, and 3 correspond to how it's offered directly in the EMR for Vitalogic. So the 4 milligram will be protocol 1, the 4 milligram, 2 milligram will be protocol 2, and then the 2 milligram will be protocol 3. And if you would want to do essentially the double day dosing, you would essentially just have to buy 2 vials. And so with that, I'll definitely let Blake go into a little bit more of some of the side effects, what you'll see clinically from your patients, in order to give a good approach into how to approach your patients.
Yeah, so really the main side effect that we want to reiterate to make sure our patients are well aware of before taking is upon each injection, majority of patients do experience some type of flushing effect. We kind of relate it to similar to a niacin flush. So you will kind of get a warm feeling all over. Doesn't happen to everyone, but it is a very common side effect that we like to let the patients make sure they are aware of so they don't freak out on each injection. And it does normally happen if they do get the flushing, it normally does happen with each injection. It doesn't really go away after so many injections. So it's something to make the patients well aware of, that it is totally common. And then anytime you talk about growth hormone therapy, you have to at least address, like Ryan mentioned earlier, the cancer risk. There is studies out there for both ends, so we're not here to try to push you one way or another. But one good thing we can tell you is with our products, with IGF-1, our products do, so IGF-1, can cause cancer, but the IGF-1 from our products, they do stimulate the release of the IGF-1 binding protein 3, and this binding protein, really has an inverse effect on the cancer risk. So basically, it has a protective factor for the patients to really help minimize that cancer risk with our growth hormone therapy peptides. And anytime you're dealing with putting a foreign substance into your body, everybody has the risk of developing an IgE reaction and developing some kind of hypersensitivity. It is very rare, but we have had some cases where someone has developed some hives or rashes, and of course anytime that happens, we want to urge the patient to stop therapy at that time.
And that's essentially it. If you all have any more questions, you can always reach out to Blake or I. My email is rs@tailormadecompounding.com, and Blake's is going to be blake@tailormadecompounding.com. We obviously would love to work with you. If you have any other patient concerns or particularly different patient cases, please reach out to us, and we'd love to help however we can.